Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sten Salover. I'm the head of CanNext, and thank you for coming to this very, very important session. I think personally for me and the world, despite of the beautiful weather, pun intended, in Cannes, as well as a security situation. Before we start this session, I would like all of you to take a little moment and make a contemplation. So, aren't we really living in a very polarized time where, whilst we are here in Cannes and celebrating our creativity, celebrating amazing films, celebrating seeing each other, being on the beach, then a few thousand miles from here, hundreds of thousands of people are standing and fighting for the freedom and the comfort what we can have here today. And I think we really never should forget that. Now, Ukraine is much more closer than we believe. Personally, for me, I've lost 3 people I know within the last year. And this tragedy is getting closer and closer to us. But of course, at the same time, life needs to go on. And actually, in January, I was in a very high-level business conference in Germany, and I started talking with a close friend of mine about what Ukraine really needs. And what kind of emerged really from that picture is that in one way, of course, we think about Ukraine in terms of iron and steel and crane shipments and gases and heavy industries and so forth. But actually, Ukraine is a home of many game-changing companies in creativity, in technology, in gaming, in cinema, in AI, in synthetic voice, in data science, in audience analytics, in virtual dressing, and so forth. And of course, powering a lot of the world's best IP as well. And what this friend of mine was telling me is that in many ways, we are in a paradoxical situation because what seems to be for her the most important for Ukraine is to work, to continue to work, to be not to be forgotten, and to go on with business as usual. So this statement really profoundly touched me, and looking into this matter, I realized that we really need to step out the game with Ukraine. We are not here for a short term and having a vacation together in Crimea next year, but we are here in the long term of really thinking about how this extraordinary country and its extraordinary talents can have a long journey with us as Europeans in Europe. And this is exactly what we are going to discuss in today's session. How can we make this collaboration more effective? What extraordinary achievements Ukraine has achieved in this extraordinary situation? And what is our joint road ahead? What I would also like to do before the session is that we have brought this year for Cannes 5 extraordinary companies from Ukraine: Respeecher, Dressix, 1Tent, Reface is somewhere here, and Data Science UA. And you'll be able to meet the entrepreneurs and see what types of amazing products, services they're developing. So please join us after the session at the Viewpoint. But without further ado, I'd like to invite on stage Mr. Taras Shevchenko. This is the key speaker of our session, the Deputy Minister of Culture and Information Policy from Ukraine, Craig Foreman, our moderator from Next News Ventures, Kristen Davies from SyncC, and Guy-Philippe Goldstein at XCon Capital. Craig, I hand it to you then.
Thank you very much, Sten. And Sten, thank you for your leadership, along with Guillaume, in having such a session.
Thank you, Craig.
Our time is short. And so before we speak with Taras, with Kristen and Guy-Philippe, I'd first also like to introduce someone who wanted to be here but can't for obvious reasons given the war in Ukraine, Valeria Ionian, who we met most recently in Tallinn, who's the Deputy Minister for Digital Transformation. We have 2 quick videos from Kyiv. If we could run the first video, please.
Good evening, dear ladies and gentlemen. I would like to start my speech by expressing sincere gratitude to all of you for standing with Ukraine and supporting Ukraine. From 2014 and then from February 2022, with the beginning of a full-scale Russian invasion to Ukraine, Russia tries to bring to Ukraine its vision of the barbaric world: murderers, torturers, robberies, destruction of cities, deportation or forced displacement of Ukrainians. Ukrainian armed forces, the people of Ukraine and the government of Ukraine continue to fight for our freedom and the bright future of Ukraine, Europe and the world. And we will continue to fight till our victory. There were also a lot of new challenges on the digital front from the beginning of a full-scale Russian invasion to Ukraine. That's why we have created a lot of efficient solutions. New services in the DiiA State Super App for IDPs, social and financial assistance, the possibility to report on damaged property, chatbot Ivorok to report about Russian troops or Russian equipment, as well as DiiA TV and DiiA Radio embedded into DiiA app, aiming to give access for 24/7 truthful use to Ukrainians. Also, United 24 initiative was created, the greatest fundraising project of all time, which aims to help Ukraine to rebuild fast and efficiently in different directions like education, infrastructure and healthcare and many others. And we are very, very grateful for every gesture, initiative and project for our United 24 partners and ambassadors. Meanwhile, even during the war, the state must function efficiently and citizens must receive services fast. Thus, we in the Ministry of Digital Transformation continue building the most convenient digital state in the world. User-centric, easy to use for citizens, without bureaucracy and paperless, with zero tolerance to corruption. We want to transform people's lives, institutions and businesses for the better with the help of digital technologies. All Ukrainians have a common dream: peace after our victory. And we are ready for this stage. The post-war rebuild should be based on the digital economy with the most innovative solutions. I will share our vision with you. Let's look 7 years ahead, 2030. The history of the new Ukraine is studied all over the globe. Why? Because Ukraine has become the most digital and convenient country in the world. The high-tech sector represents 500,000 public servants are successfully integrated in the new economy, paperless and cashless. Ukraine now has the best taxes for the IT industry in the most affordable e-residency. Thanks to Ukrainian engineering programmers who established the top tech companies and operate successfully. And Ukraine ranks first in the world by the number of startups per capita. AI guides Ukrainian courts. Ukrainian customs are fully automatic and the fastest in the world. Custom clearance and car registration can be done in 3 clicks from the smartphone. Because of war and internal migration, we have built the most flexible and modern digital education. Brave military and civilians get quality treatment with modern remote monitoring and e-health systems. Ukraine also has the most effective cyber defense in the world. The Ukrainian government is digitally more like an IT company in terms of the efficiency of implementing decisions such as opening a business or getting a license, registering a car or real estate from the smartphone automatically in 1 click. Ukraine 2030 is the freest and the most digital country globally because of international partners and the world's leading tech companies' support in building a new Ukraine together. Free and the fastest.
Is short, but I would like you, if you take just one thing from today's session, and it doesn't really matter in what language you say it, never again, jamais plus jamais, no mas, or any of the other languages that you may speak that are represented by the dozens of countries that are here in Cannes. How often in the modern era have we heard those words, never again? And yet, here we are. The reason why we started with that video, and Taras is going to tell us from having left Kiev just a day and a half ago to get here, what the situation is like for culture and the creative industries that you all represent. But it's pretty amazing to me, as introducing myself, a former US CEO of a large media company, but a foreign correspondent in Europe during previous wars, like the war in Yugoslavia, that here we are in 2023 having said never again so many times, and yet we're saying never again, again. How do we make that different? If we leave here with one thing, what the Alliance for Civil and Digital Resilience is trying to organize is a way that if we look at ourselves and no longer say naively never again, that if never again becomes never again so awfully, so terribly, so horribly for so many people. And that message of hope, that message of extraordinary resilience is something that the Alliance for Civil and Digital Resilience believes has many lessons to learn for all of us in civil society. And that's what we'd like to explore today. So I'm going to start with Taras. Taras, thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting.
As the Deputy Minister for Culture and Information, in a time of war, what is the situation regarding culture, creative industries, how you build a continuing Ukrainian culture society in a time of war?
I think it's maybe hard to imagine how Ukrainians live in Ukraine without having this experience. Just a brief points. Like before coming here, the day before yesterday, I live downtown in the Kiev with my daughter, and we woke up maybe at 3 o'clock because of sirens and very loud explosions, because rockets were coming. Successful operation of Ukrainian anti-rocket systems provided by our allies, and at the same time having experienced such experience. Afterwards, the day starts, the working day starts, the cultural life starts, and the animated movie Mavka, the Forest Song, which was only launched in March, is in Ukraine the biggest box office ever, and more than 1 million Ukrainians who got tickets.
Shout out for Mavka.
So, by the way, Catherine Deneuve, who was speaking on the opening of the festival, she was quoting Lesya Ukrainka, the poet, who also the animated film that was produced is also inspired by the poetry of Lesya Ukrainka. So the cultural life is very active, despite the fact that many Ukrainians went abroad as a cultural diplomats of Ukraine. And companies are operating. The DiiA company that produced Mavka, they restarted the operation. They successfully work in Ukraine during the time of war. And that's the mission of all the strong Ukrainians that we feel we have to do. We have absolutely no time to lose, and everyone should be on their own front line. And the business development is the front line as well. Our strong IT companies that are developing, and the roommate that grew 60% last year, the other companies that produce very good results and continue their operation despite all the problems. I think it's very, very good results that Ukraine demonstrate. I think we should change the mindset about perceiving Ukrainians and Ukraine. In many cases, I think Ukraine was underestimated, but the different mindset should be applied. Yes, the situation is not an easy one. Yes, the challenges are strong, but strong people, they perceive the challenges as an opportunities. They see more energy, they obtain more energy for development. And development in the digital sphere is one of the important sphere, the top sphere, both for the government and the private sector. Just last phrase to add. My colleague was talking about DiiA application. It's really amazing job. And many Ukrainians who went abroad, they start comparing how it's in other countries. And with the digital documentation operation with government, mostly they were saying, come on, in Ukraine it's much better. It's much easier to communicate with the government through DiiA than experience they have in other countries.
Taras, we'll come back to DiiA in a second, and also Kristen and Guy-Philippe are going to talk a little bit about how the alliance, ACDR, is trying to learn the lessons that Ukraine is showing that can be applied elsewhere. But before we get there, and just being a little bit facetious, if I may, when Michael from Room 8 said that the company, a gaming technology company, grew 60% top-line revenue, and I'm a venture capitalist in Silicon Valley, 60% top-line revenue growth in the last 12 months is pretty amazing. The first thing that someone would say in Silicon Valley is, well, if there were no war, could you grow 120%? So that's a pretty amazing performance. What can we do in the cultural and creative industries to help Ukraine with this sort of performance, and also to have that kind of performance ourselves in working with Ukraine?
For us at the Ministry of Culture and Information Policy, it's very important to promote cooperation of Ukrainian companies with foreign companies, with foreign investors, co-production, joint projects, making orders from Ukrainian business to participate in bigger projects. That's what I consider is one of the best ways, not just to support Ukraine, but actually to be profitable yourself in the future, to get to get profits, to get revenues, and you're right, without war, the results would be even better. But I think the most important trend that Ukrainian companies are in line, not just in line, but in many cases ahead of the developments in digital sphere. And now with developments in the artificial intelligence, we see that the speed of changes is even higher. And that will be profitable for everyone to have such cooperations with Ukrainian companies, those who are present here, those who are not here. There are many more initiatives that we have. And like looking into this market, looking into the Ukrainian companies, that's something we would really, really encourage you to do.
So a shout out according not only to the people in the room, but the many, many more watching us live on YouTube and other social media. The fact is it's a global industry. Obviously, we're seeing it here. Today, you can visit an example of this co-production, the Banksy Murals Initiative, which involves a number of European countries and was produced, of course, in the middle of the war, in the middle of ongoing battling. I wanted to say a word about DiiA. I realize it's another ministry, but for those who haven't been able to learn about it, and you must be Ukrainian in order to sign up for the digital platform, it's sort of hard to explain exactly how profoundly it has been an actor for social cohesion and for keeping the Ukrainian diaspora. I may have the numbers a little bit off. 10 million Ukrainians living outside the country now, 18 million Ukrainians on the platform. It's a platform that began as a way to get identification cards, passports, and driver's license digitally, and now is a school distance learning platform so Ukrainian children don't lose their Ukrainian roots. It allows you to do displaced person compensation from the government, and many, many other things in civilian life that are very difficult to do in the OECD's best, highest performing economies, including, you know, those of many of us here on the panel. I know you can't really speak about DiiA, it's a different ministry, but tell us a little bit about this social cohesion that technology has been able to drive during the war.
Well, I can speak about DiiA because I use DiiA very often, and it's really amazing app, very convenient. And with Ministry of Digital Transformation, adding new services every year, and yeah, it's really making your life much easier when you can do some operation or check your. Unfortunately, even in wartime, we need to provide the identity very, very often, and having everything in the telephone is useful. But also reaching people with opinion polls, with paying taxes through DiiA as well for entrepreneurs. That's very easy, and I hope it will be not only developing. We know that many other countries they're interested in having some kind of program for them, and with the digital technologies and in our days, yeah, they are included into all the spheres, from military, where many drone systems or other military equipment, military programs, they need such programming as well, which is used, from humanitarian organizations, from those people who make platforms to collect people to create some projects together, and in many, many other cases.
So let me tie it back to your ministry, and not solely DiiA, but talk about, as the deputy minister, it's a senior position, how the digital platform also can have a civil society impact from the world of culture. It's become a broadcaster, the Eurovision contest broadcast on DiiA, but also a major source of news and information, broadcasting television news and radio to citizens in Ukraine, even if they're not physically in Ukraine, I think. The journalist in me has to ask, in the hands of a bad actor, such a platform could be used as a platform for propaganda, misinformation, disinformation. And what lessons should we learn about this role of information being distributed by the same group that's using this for civil society resilience?
That's a good question, pretty broad one. The DiiA, of course, is one part of the informational infrastructure, and I don't think it can be used by any bad actors for promoting the cause. And generally, as from the side of our ministry. I would say that our role now is to make a balance between some limitations in spreading information, because they always happen when it's time of war, and freedoms. And freedom of speech. I used to be freedom of speech lawyer for many years, and I know how important it is. And media, they operate freely on their own, and we have very big diversity of television channels, of other medias. We have a challenging area which is called Telegram, and Telegram streaming, Telegram channels, they are extremely popular within Ukrainians, with millions of users who are subscribed. And with Telegram right now being a #1 source of news for Ukrainians, so the news data mostly largely goes to Telegram, but also with other challenges, whether Telegram is actually secure or not, and whether there are people who want to abuse and to spread disinformation. We maintain created and maintain the Center of Strategic Communication and the National Program in Media Literacy Filter. That's the two biggest our initiatives with the ministry to deal with disinformation and media literacy. And we have a lot to share in this area as well, and cooperate with many other countries.
Well, Taras, thank you. And I think it's pretty clear when you work for a boss who himself is a television star and a pretty good communicator, if you're going to be working in the ministry as the Deputy Minister for Communications, you better be on your game. So pretty clearly you're on your game. Thank you for that. I'd like to turn to Kristen if I can. And Kristen, I'd like to ask you in your many roles, but particularly with the Alliance, ACDR, but also in your roles as a board member of other civil society groups like APOPA and others, tell us a little bit about the Alliance and what its aims are and what it hopes to achieve.
Thank you, Craig. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here with you all. And as Craig says, I'm wearing a couple of hats. That of the Alliance, we are the Alliance for Civil and Digital Resilience. I guess you could say we were created 450 days ago. We've been around for a little longer, but that's how many days we've been actively supporting Ukrainian business and the Ukrainian economy through finding partners to cooperate and collaborate, as Taras was just saying, through finding funding and support, and many different ways in support, in fact, in the ways we can reach out and help the Ukrainian diaspora, but most of all the Ukrainian startups. We are a collective of pan-European and beyond experts, some of whom are on this stage, some of whom are in the audience and are actually then around the globe, with years of expertise in creating innovation and resilience in business. That may be corporates, it may be startups, digital tech, but also media, government, and not-for-profit. What we are looking to do is to actually bring in the learnings and support the pillars of resilience. What is resilience? Resilience is about the cooperation and connectivity. Resilience is about the speed and capacity to be able to react. And it's also about being prepared to be able to do that. So what are the lessons that we can learn from some of the Ukrainian startups, and what are some of the things that we can do to support them in creating resilience? Because ultimately, what we're trying to do is to create resilience for the Ukrainian ecosystem, create resilience for the European ecosystem by doing that also, and the global ecosystem and all of their economies.
Kristen, I want to come back to a few things you just mentioned, but you've often talked about capacity building and how the Alliance aims to build capacity throughout, let's call it the world of liberal democracies, for supporting societal and civil resilience. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about the insight that the Alliance had that maybe Ukraine is sort of the first 21st century cyber war in a kinetic way, and how DiiA, other civil integration, even the success of the startups, shows us how resilient a successful economy, a successful resistance can be. How would the Alliance help with capacity building? What are some of these, I'd like to explore, what are some of these lessons that the Alliance could help bring out in a structure across Europe or even transatlantically?
Certainly, I think in fact, there are a number of different examples. So I'm going to actually talk about some of the startups that we have in the room here with us, and they're going to be on a panel just after this to illustrate some of the frameworks and the models. Okay, so we've got ReSpeech, which are right over there. Okay, ReSpeech, if you haven't heard of them, you've probably heard some of their work. They're working with Disney, they've been working with Sony, they've done the voice of Darth Vader, they've done the voice of Luke Skywalker. But not only are they continuing to collaborate with these studios and therefore the economy through all of this, they've also branched out into healthcare, and they're actually creating and helping people with voice distortions using their synthetic voice. Okay, so that's an example and a model of innovation and then reaching out beyond that.
I think you had thought that the Alliance, too, could help bring many of these examples to other countries to learn how some of the lessons that can be gleaned from this.
This is it. I mean, what we're seeing in Ukraine in many of those startups are effectively lessons that we can bring and create into new models, new frameworks, scale those up and out. And through the Alliance and through a European kick, we actually want to create a European resilience kick.
A kick of knowledge and
information community. To be able to scale those out. So whilst supporting Ukrainian startups, bring out those learnings, never waste a good crisis, one of my fellow countrymen once said. Bring those learnings out and then scale those up. So how can we replicate what we're seeing and those great lessons that the examples we're seeing from the Ukrainian startups, and bring those out to the European ecosystem as well? We need to be creating more European champions, and that means creating more European resilience, hence calling for a European resilience kick.
Now, I know your board role at Apopo and the Hero Rats project, where demining activity, mining detection around the world, Southeast Asia, other conflict zones, has been a huge success for that group and NGO. What kind of lessons from your experience there are applicable to the situation here, including maybe you can talk about some of the financing options? I think you described them as development impact bonds. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about some of the activity there.
Here's a great example of how we can learn from other conflict zones and, in fact, innovate from there and use those to support what's going on in Ukraine. So I'm also the U.S. chairboard of Apopo Hero Rats. We train rats and dogs to detect explosives, landmines, unexploded ordnance using their amazing sense of smell. We're highly innovative in that field, but we're also highly innovative in other ways. And we've created one of the first of its kind development impact bonds. This is actually for an operation in Cambodia, but that we can now hopefully replicate for Ukraine also. This is government-backed investment bonds. We have the British government, the FCDO, working with us, which enables us to bring in private investors into to support an operation and offer them not just sustainable and impact bonds, but also government guaranteed market rate returns on that. So we're creating innovative funding models. This is out of something we're doing with, as I mentioned, the FCDO and CordAid in Cambodia, and is something that we can replicate. And that's a fine example of what our resilience kick would try and do. Find these innovative models around about, and how can we then replicate them, innovate on from them, and scale them.
So we've covered platforms such as DiiA providing civil resilience and capacity building in nations that don't have that. We've talked about things like Apopo, Hero Rats, and potential financing options that could lead this kick to have an ability to have capacity building for countries that obviously haven't gone through the horrors of the Ukraine war, but can learn lessons from that?
Certainly. I think this is the thing also. I mean, right now we're focused on Ukraine, but let's face it, the lessons that we're learning there could serve any of the other startups in many, many other countries and industries. Some of the sort of returns and growth that we've seen from Ukraine, we should be able to replicate that in other European countries also. We need to be able to build the connectivity and the cooperation to be able to do this. Again, what Taras was talking about, we're able to create the funding models and the frameworks to be able to do this. And we're able to bring in speed and capacity to do this as well. Just want to give you one example, if I can, of speed and capacity. Again, another innovation from Apopo in Cambodia that we can bring to Ukraine and we can bring elsewhere also. A square meter of land, everyone can imagine what that looks like, okay? If we need to manually demine that using metal detectors, it will cost $77 to do that, okay? We're using our technical survey dogs, and we're actually creating a local NGO in Ukraine so that we can employ Ukrainians with our technical survey dogs. We can do that not for $77, but we can do that for $9, and we can do it 10 times faster with a dog than we can with a manual deminer. So these are the ways in which we're kind of innovating, both in a product line also, and the kind of innovations that we want to be able to bring across Europe and beyond.
So we've covered a lot of ground already. We've talked about culture and society. We've talked about digital platforms. The Ukrainian startup scene and its great success despite the war, what we've seen in other NGOs and civil society organizations like Apopo that could also offer lessons. Guy-Philippe, if I can, I'd like to turn to you to put some of this, if you would, in a bit of historical perspective and strategic perspective. You've written extensively on these topics. You've led tabletop exercises for people like the French Army and multinational corporations. How could the efforts that we've been talking about help build capacity in the rest of civil society, learning these lessons from Ukraine while supporting Ukrainian resistance, but getting other societies ready or more prepared in this environment?
Thanks for the question, and thanks to be here. Well, indeed, there's I'm going to stress what has already said here. There's a lot to be learned from what happened with Ukraine, which is by itself an incredible lesson in resilience. And we've mentioned a couple of issues. We could talk about what happened in cyber, which is one of my domain expertise, where there were at least 5,000 major cyber attacks against Ukraine that Ukraine managed to fully withstand. We talked a lot about the digital IT ecosystem, which has gone through a fantastic, first a horrible test, but then a fantastic example of rebuilding out of that and actually growing. It's been mentioned, I guess, but I think revenues of the IT ecosystem in Ukraine has grown by 13% in the first year of war.
Overall, yeah.
Overall,
yeah.
Which is just incredible, which is the best example that you can trust in the IT ecosystem of Ukraine. Okay.
Right. Michael from Room8, the CEO who's here, or the chairman, they're growing faster than the overall industry, so they're happy about that, but 13% is still pretty good.
On average, but I'm sure there are even better examples than that. But net, it does show that we, Europeans, and beyond that, have all a lot to learn from Ukraine. So now, if I want to go a slight framework about what do we call, what are the elements of resilience? A way to understand is like the 3 pillars of resilience, which is, again, resiliare, to rebound, in Latin, to recover, which is exactly what happened, because there are lots of shocks that are going against us that we'll not be able to protect fully against. So we'll need to take them on, but then we'll need to recover, which is what Ukraine is showing to the rest of the world. So there's 3 pillars to that. 1, absorb the initial shock. Second, react, and react fast, and the element of speed is important indeed. And then to react before the crisis, which is critical, that is to learn and train and test yourself and build a culture of that. On each of those 3 pillars, there's a lot to be learned from Ukraine. If we talk about, say, absorb the shock and find basically redundant capabilities inside or elsewhere. A lot of the reason of the success of many of the companies, of IT companies in Ukraine, has been the ability to offshore some of their capabilities, their deliveries in other data centers, and to do that quickly, sometimes because they had already established bonds in Germany and elsewhere. Same at the level of government, where lots of sensitive data has actually been moved into data centers in Poland, in Estonia, in other European countries. So this is really the idea of finding redundant capabilities elsewhere, and sometimes also maintaining all sorts of old and new technologies. For example, an older example, what happened against the electric grid in Ukraine, where there were actually fierce Russian cyber attacks in 2014, 2015, where actually electricity was able to be put back on because there were lots of electromechanical, not solely digital. And this was actually already a learning that was drawn in the US Congress, in the US Senate, where Senator Angus King from that started to develop a project for the US electrical grid, really taking inspiration from what happened in Ukraine. So this is the absorb part. But then you have the react, and the react fast part. And I'd say what we see in wartime in Ukraine is, again, quite extraordinary. And you could talk about what we've seen, for example, in cyber, with the mobilization of the IT army of Ukraine, lots of volunteers helping and then sometimes launching reprisals against Russia. But also, and this is important in terms of doctrine, the ability to convey best of support from, say, the EU, the US, the cyber command US, and also private companies. So again, to mobilize internal and external networks quickly for help. And this is key lesson in wartime, but also in peacetime. Sten mentioned a key element, which is polarization, which may have happened in Ukraine before the war, and which is happening in all our society, and which is, to a large extent, a big ongoing crisis that we have, because these bring disunion within the confines of our societies. And if we are disunited, then we're weak. If we're weak, we invite aggression from some of our enemies coming to Ukraine, and then we have problems. And then again, we see ways to mobilize external or internal networks, some from Ukraine, also from beyond, from other additional examples. A lot has been done, for example, in another front line in Taiwan, in the ability to have people not using social networks to have divergence views, but to have convergence views. For example, V-Taiwan, set up by Audrey Tang. And also other additional examples that can be seen across the world, including the United States, for example, housing in Oakland and so forth. Again, there's this rise of computational democracy, which is really this ability to develop new types of networks, to have people taking part and have converging views.
So to get to your third leg, your third element, the being prepared before the crisis, I want to come back to that in a second. But it sounds like in laying this out, you and Kristen have thought deeply about how the ACDR, the Alliance for Civil and Digital Resilience, would help to build, I guess the best thing to call it would be maybe a playbook that could offer insights for other places to be prepared in case of damage. Now, that shouldn't mean that someone is being prepared for the horrors of what's happened in Ukraine. That's not what the Alliance is saying. But are you saying that there are lessons so you could be prepared before the shock?
Yes, the key thing is actually, and this is a third and most important element, if I may, for resilience, is training before the shock to prepare for that. And there are many different ways to do that. You get plans and playbooks. And then the key thing is actually to play on the playbooks. That is, for example, to run some stuff I've been doing from a French general staff and from corporation in the United States and in France.
So tell us about that's a scenario plan, a tabletop exercise,
you
I
do
guess.
Tabletop exercises, and you do that for any questions you want to test. And from that, you are going to test your response or find new response to the questions. You're going also to have people being prepared at the individual level, and even more important than that, you're going to have people able to learn to work with other groups, with cross-sectoral individuals. And that's also extremely important because the key element for resilience is that it's sports team, everyone's together, and everyone need to learn to work together, and that's what those type of games are very useful for.
Now, I know that you've thought a great deal about European champions as an important element, creating European champions. Tell us a little bit about how that overlays to what we've been talking about here for the ACDR and for stronger resilience.
Well, the key thing here is that we're faced with a new security situation. I really want to stress that. And in any situation, there are elements for the military, all right, but there's also elements for civil defense. And I think it's a great place for the EU, which is a civilian organization, to start thinking about how we can solidify those elements of civil defense, which is, in large extent, as critical as the military one facing the new type of threats we're talking about. And that's part of the reason we're all discussing and thinking and developing this alliance for civil and digital resilience. Because the key element is how we can, if we talk about civil defense, how we can mobilize people inside and outside with friends, which is extremely important. How we can do that in terms of capability building, and I really stress that. We're not here just about the talk, but how we can move into capability building and create EU digital champions to set up those capabilities for this extremely important element of resilience. That's what we want to do. And that's a critical point to try to save the situation where we are in.
So one final question for you, and I'd like you to take a second to think about it. Obviously on this panel, we have a lot of different backgrounds. We're actually all Europeans, dual nationals, what have you. But the transatlantic alliance is also part of what you can hear in my accent. This moment is a moment in historical time, the crisis in Ukraine. Taras walked us through it. Valeria talked about all the activity going on with DiiA and the like, lessons learned. If you can, situate us with the never again, where this moment and this opportunity for strengthening digital, civil and digital, the alliance, how it fits into the historical context, and how do we take it forward to making sure that it's never like this again?
Well, when you say never again, for me, it touched a very deep chord, evidently. My background is Jewish, Polish family. And indeed, we're all, to some extent, children, grandchildren of something very bad that happened in Europe 80 years ago, which had many reasons. One being the strong disunion of Europe, both nationally and also within the nations of Europe, which is a state that we don't want to go back to, which is one of the reasons the EU was created. But we do see today, 80 years ago, that we stand again at this point of inflection where we have external threats that seep into our nations, and that we need to build on this nation rebuilding within the confines of each of our society. This is the best response we can have when we think about our parents and grandparents 80 years ago. And this is where we need to rebuild union, to rebuild civil defense, to help architecture that union. And that's why we need those new capabilities in resilience. Again, as I mentioned, it is a core strategic interest for all the nations of Europe to start thinking about that. There is the military for that, but there's also the civil defense for that, and we need to do it now.
So let me try to bring this home with deep thanks to all of you, but also just to take a moment. Thank you all for a panel at a cultural and creative gathering of literally tens of thousands of people from all over the world spending your time. In just a moment, you'll see some of the most creative IT leaders in Ukraine who have been able to do an absolutely unbelievable job. If I think about my life as a venture capitalist, the excuses I get from some of my CEOs, and if I could introduce them to some of the Ukrainian entrepreneurs here, I think they'd have a harder time making some of the excuses that they make. A little uncharitable, but I think those of you who know. I'd like to summarize by just leaving you with this. We live at a moment in time where the hard-earned lessons learned by the incredible resistance of the last 450 days are an opportunity not to be missed for the entire world. Ukraine's resistance, Ukraine's strength, Ukraine's performance during these 450 days is not something we're going to talk about in any detail here, and it's the Cannes Film Festival. We always run to time here at the Cannes Film Festival. But in the last minute that we're together, I think we've learned that the Alliance for Civil and Digital Resilience believes that it can be a force for accelerating positive lessons learned, and that there's an opportunity for all of us to learn from our friends in Ukraine, to support their resistance, and to actually, Guy Philippe, to your point, be prepared for the next never again. We won't leave this on a falsely optimistic note, and we won't repeat the words never again, saying naively, it can never happen again, but it can't ever happen again. And when it does, let's resolve to be better prepared so that if it does, and when it does happen again, it doesn't lead to the horrors and the pain and the dislocation and the loss of what we've experienced in Europe and what Ukraine has experienced in the last 450 days. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for your efforts and for the efforts of Ukraine, Taras. Thank you for making the trip from Kyiv. And to Kristen and Guy-Philippe, thank you for your efforts with the Alliance. I'm very happy to be part of that too, and good luck with all of its future.
Thank you. And just very rapidly now, following this panel, there is a panel at, is it Viewpoint?
Viewpoint in the Leren's room for the Ukrainian entrepreneurs.
So make sure you head there right now to meet the finest minds that have made it from Ukraine here to Cannes to present to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for making the trip, Taras, really.